So to my surprise, Chris Hayes of MSNBC actually did a segment on the pro-Palestine protesters being smeared. And it's not bad. It's not bad. I mean, there's still some sprinkles of like, this is MSNBC and you're resistance liberal brained and you're not really repping the left position, but this is still better than I expected. Maddow hasn't said Dickie McGee's axe. You have some people on the network who are outright hostile to these pro-Palestine protesters. So, look, pleasant surprise. Certainly more than I expected. But, you know, Chris Hayes is sort of a tragic figure in many ways because he wrote that book. What was it called? Twilight of the Elites or something? And then he became the thing he described in the book, right? He became this media insider who is too shaped by his environment and doesn't have that outsider's perspective anymore. But here's a little bit of a glimmer of old-time Chris Hayes. Let's watch and we'll break it down here.
In the spring of 1969, a group of students at Morehouse College, historically black college in Atlanta, were frustrated by what they said was the school's slow progress on civil rights. And they'd protested, they'd been rebuffed. So they locked the college trustees in their office for 2 days and essentially held them hostage. Now, one of the trustees was Martin Luther King Sr., father of the recently slain civil rights leader. He began having chest pains, and one of the students later said, "We let him out of there so he wouldn't be accused of murder." That student and his classmates eventually gave up under a promise of amnesty from the college. The college reneged, and he was expelled. It would be years before he was rehabilitated, decades before he became known the world over as actor Samuel L. Jackson. Now, I tell this story for 2 reasons. One, to remind us that college activism has long been a part of college education.
By the way, that's a wild story. I did not know those specifics. I knew Samuel L. Jackson was involved in a protest. I did not know it was that. That's wild, bro.
The other reason, though, is to get a sense of proportion, which seems lacking today. As we watch the disturbing imagery emerge from campuses at Columbia, UCLA, University of Texas, University of South Florida, so many others, where cops, or in some cases mobs, took down pro-Palestinian student encampments and protests, as well as professors and journalists and just random bystanders. The cumulative effect of all this coverage, along with some unverified assertions from police and politicians, has been to drive home the idea that student protests are basically a terrorist-level threat, that they have to be neutralized by battalions of cops armed like soldiers with MRAPs and sonic cannons. The reason this seems to me a reaction that's out of proportion to the protests themselves. It seems especially true when you look at some other campuses like Brown University, where administrators negotiated with student protesters who took down their encampment, and Wesleyan University, whose president said the protesting there was nonviolent and non-disruptive, adding, as long as it continues in this way, the university will not attempt to clear the encampment. Now, these universities, crucially, have reiterated their important existing rules against anti-Semitic invective and harassment, certainly, while also protecting assembly, which seems sensible, also out of step with what you're seeing elsewhere. Because ever since October 7th, when Hamas committed its atrocities in Israel, there has been this obsessive media focus on college campuses. And that's true partly because there are genuine issues worth debating, including the degree to which universities are creating spaces that are hostile to pro-Israel Jewish students, where they feel under threat, or universities, the degree to which they're suppressing pro-Palestinian speech. And those issues really do matter. But the way that so many prominent voices have focused so exclusively on colleges feels honestly a bit decadent to me. Like we're doing a paper doll version of the conflict, because the actual reality of what's happening in Gaza is so horrific, unceasing, and high stakes. It's more enjoyable to argue about what college kids are doing than to confront the human misery and destruction that's happening in the actual conflict. That is, of course, the source of these protests. What seems most worth debating isn't campus speech, but whether the U.S. government should continue to fund and support an Israeli war in Gaza that has pushed more than 1 million people to the brink of famine, a war that has damaged half of the buildings in Gaza, a war that has failed to bring home most of the hostages held by Hamas, that has in fact led to the death of some of those hostages, as well as the deaths of an estimated 34,000 Palestinians, including roughly 10,000 women and 13,000 children. Is that ongoing effort morally defensible? Is it strategically wise? Are we as a nation doing the right or wrong thing and continuing to support it? Now, whenever that becomes a question, it almost becomes reflexive to challenge the questioner. And I can't help but think of the protests that marked the lead up to the Iraq War, which were both widely attended and widely attacked. And many, many prominent war supporters, including one-time student protester Christopher Hitchens, blasted those demonstrations. And he pointed to the fact that some of the people organizing the protests held genuinely odious and fringe views. For instance, the view that North Korea is a workers' paradise and a great place. That's a horrible view. There were protest organizers with bad views, lots of them. There were people at the protests with terrible views. There were people who thought 9/11 was an inside job. I would argue with them myself at protests. Did that have anything to do at all with whether the war in Iraq was moral and prudent? No. The war in Iraq demonstrably was neither. On that, the protesters were right. Which brings us back to Columbia University, where 56 years ago, almost to the day, student protesters took over the same building, Hamilton Hall, that was occupied earlier this week. They, too, were forcibly removed and arrested. Many were bloodied and beaten for protesting, among other things, the university's involvement in the Vietnam War. They believed the war was a moral catastrophe and the U.S. should stop waging it. They were right. And the fact that there were absolutely genuine extremists among those protesters in '68, again, had no bearing on whether they were right or not about that. What I find particularly maddening about our focus on the protesters of the conflict is that it's an invasion. It avoids the difficult task of being universally empathetic to our fellow human beings and truly reckoning with the scale of devastation that is wrought by our country in our names, with our support. In the aftermath of 9/11, we waged a global war on terror for 2 decades that killed an estimated 430,000 people, many of them children, women, elderly, innocents. In Vietnam, we were estimated to have killed more than 1 million people, huge swaths of them civilians, women, children, male non-combatants, old people, and the like. Can you even make sense of those numbers? I can't. No one can. It's hard to think of them, to contend with them as actual real human beings who lived lives before we took them, who are people like you or I, who were loved by the people in their lives. It is much easier to get angry at the spoiled brats on college campuses. Why are they being so disruptive? What are they so upset about? If you feel that way, which I can understand, honestly, I felt irritation and anger at protesters many times in my life, even ones I was ostensibly on the same side as, broadly speaking. If you feel that way, just try recasting the question. Why are all these people so upset that we're helping a government wage a brutal war that's killed 13,000 children? The question kind of answers itself. To take seriously the scale of human suffering that's happening in Gaza doesn't mean you must come down on the side of the protesters, certainly. There are many people who think the war is a brutal but necessary campaign for Israel's defense. What it does necessitate is that you weigh all the human suffering against the actual end game of the conflict that is currently being waged and is unarticulated as of now. A conflict the U.S. continues to support. Our humanity demands we focus on those questions first and last.
So look, the core of the argument is like, why are we talking about the college protest so much? Why is that the debate? Why is it some chance from a 19-year-old? The real focus of the conversation is what they're against. They're against these individual universities and colleges having financial ties with Israel. It's no different than back in the day when they had financial ties with apartheid South Africa. Student didn't like that either. They're against that, and they're against the genocide and ethnic cleansing in Gaza. That's what they're against. So let's discuss the issue as such. Let's discuss the main point. And what he's saying is, how many of you people are obfuscating and deflecting? How many of you people are dodging the real conversation? How many of you people are out there like, but I didn't like that chant? And by the way, there's a massive stretch that a lot of these anti-protesters say to make their argument. Like, oh, intifada actually means genociding all the Jews. No, intifada means uprising. Yeah, but historically there were some intifadas that were violent. Okay, and there also were ones that were non-violent. And you can mean intifada in the sense of a Great March of Return like 2018, or you can mean it in the sense of Palestinians have a right to defend themselves. Right? So they stretch. Oh my God, from the river to the sea is anti-Semitic. Intifada is anti-Semitic. They have a laundry list of things. You're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to say that. Why not steelman the position of the protesters? The steelman position. We don't even need to steelman it. You could just look at why they say they are doing what they're doing. And it's very clear. Divest from Israel, stop the genocide, stop the ethnic cleansing. And again, instead of having that conversation, we get bullshit deflections about, look, they have a bike chain. They meant it for violence even though they didn't. Look, all their tents are the same. They must be funded by George Soros or Hamas or Hezbollah. Look, they chanted something that now people are saying it makes them feel unsafe. You have these Zionist dudes. I feel unsafe because of what you said. Really? Have there been any examples of actual violence? The only violence I've seen was from the Zionists against the pro-Palestine protesters. One woman lied and said, oh, I got poked in the eye by a Palestinian flag. Well, we have it on video. That didn't happen. That was a lie. Her eye's totally fine. Not true. It's not true. So all the violence is on the side of the Zionists. What conversation are we really having here? It is It is a purposeful campaign of gaslighting. And it's a smear campaign against the students who are undeniably correct. And credit to Chris Hayes for actually doing this segment. There were parts of it that are like, but most of it is good. So anyway, he's on the clock. Let's see how much longer he lasts at MSNBC. By the way, Joyanne Reid has been good too. Ali Velshi has been good too. There are actually some people over there that do a good job, but some of the bigger names are the absolute worst. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.